It's Steve.
Thank you.
Okay.
Great. So as Anita has made a good introduction, that today we want to look at data protection compliance management and how it can assist your organizations unlock compliance excellence, and more importantly, be able to boost business resilience. As we talk about data privacy, it's of course critical for us as organizations in Uganda, or organizations that are processing Ugandan data subjects data, to consider compliance, but also look beyond compliance and think of digital trust, which is what we'll also be discussing as we move along.
I think we lost Steve. Could be a connection problem. Okay, I can see he's joining back. Steve, can you hear me?
Allow me just to do a brief introduction of the organization that I represent, Yale Bridges Limited. We are a cybersecurity company, and beyond that, we provide a number of services to support organizations, of course, with securing their critical infrastructure, and of course, promote compliance to data privacy laws. The African continent, and also in Germany, where we have a rich history. And the name Yale Bridges actually emanates, or rather depicts our philosophy in terms of what we do. Yellow, which is Yale, represents hope, while the bridge, we want to build that bridge to the digital future, as I had just mentioned earlier on my introduction. So as a business, we want to have our customers to have peace of mind. You do your business so that as we secure your digital landscape. And with that said, I think we are good to go now to the topic of the day. And as we all appreciate, we all have three lives: a public, a private, and a secret life. And of course, we anticipate that our private and secret lives will always remain that way, and more so, especially now that we live in a digital world. And just to walk us on the African continent, in Ghana, the Data Privacy Act was enacted way back in 2012, among the first African countries actually to recognize that data privacy and data protection was critical for doing business, for organizations to engage, and as well, of course, respect the rights of the data subjects. And of course, in 2016, the GDPR, the EU GDPR came into effect, which also became more of like a de facto compliance to data privacy. And I believe majority of African countries have actually picked a lot from GDPR as we enact various laws in various African countries.
Steve,
in Uganda and Kenya, we enacted the Data Privacy Acts in 2019. And of course, our neighbors in Rwanda and Tanzania just enacted it in the previous year. There's a trend that as countries go through the digital transformation, data privacy becomes very critical part of that journey. And of course, even the African Union itself recognizes the essence of data privacy, and of course, came up with the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection. But it's unfortunately only 14 member states have ratified this, at least as of April this year. But more importantly, what's the importance of data privacy and protection? I've just mentioned, and I know you all agree, we live in a digital era. Today, our laptops, our phones have so much data. And more so as a data subject, my data is amongst many other organizations and entities who are either delivering a service to me or I either consume a service from them. So privacy becomes a critical cornerstone for us to be able to do business. And this is not just for private companies as well as also the government. Same case, I believe, with the Ugandan government. So as organizations collect, process, and store these vast amounts of data, there is need to ensure that we comply with the acts, the Data Privacy Act, so that we provide that trust and more so digital trust to our data subjects. Secondly, towards that also our data subjects are informed. Can you see my screen?
No, we can't. Are you able to hear me now?
Sorry. Yes, Anita, I can hear you.
I tried to reach out, but I think you couldn't hear me.
Let me reshare my screen. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, my apologies for that. So I think I was just at the point of indicating that as part of us complying with the Data Protection Act, we are building trust and more so digital trust and demonstrating our commitment to our data subjects, that we are willing to uphold the data that they have entrusted with us with the highest level of security as well as protection. And of course, we need to adhere to the law in terms of the Data Privacy Act. Of course, we need to do that to avoid legal risks. Of course, the law also stipulates if we are not able to meet the requirements set out, of course, there are penalties associated with non-compliance. And thirdly, there is a bit of competitive edge. As I mentioned earlier, our data subjects today are well informed. As a data subject, I want to engage an organization that respects my data rights, an organization that processes and stores my data ethically, and an entity, a data controller, data processor that is willing to go beyond compliance and enhance digital trust, as I mentioned earlier. So data privacy should not just be seen as a compliance requirement, but you should look at it more towards being able to be transparent, being able to be fair, and respect to the individual rights in terms of the digital landscape. So in terms of, I believe you can still see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Thank you. So when we think around complying with the Data Privacy Act 2019, a few challenges data controllers and data processors will definitely face. One, of course, the Act and the laws are new to us. There's some complexity in terms of handling these data subjects, sensitive data. There's a thin balance between the usage vis-a-vis respecting the rights of the data subjects. Way before the laws were enacted, we could have collected data from our data subjects, process it automatically, or connect and then Ugandan jurisdiction without even seeking consent from the data subject. But now with the Act, there are regulations and requirements that we must meet for us to be able to do that. So there's that tricky bit of being able to balance usage of this data that we've been provided by the. But also there is the bit of also keeping up with the evolving regulations landscape. So we are looking at Uganda Data Protection Act, but that does not mean that as an organization in Uganda, you're only dealing with or rather you are partnering and doing business with Ugandan companies or governments. You probably be engaging near EU or in the US, meaning that as an entity registered in Uganda, one, of course, you must comply with the Data Privacy Act in Uganda. You may need also to comply to the other regional or
Steve, you keep breaking. Steve, can you hear me? Steve, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, your network is unstable. Maybe you could consider
Sorry
switching
about
off the
that,
video
Anita.
for now.
Could you just give me a minute? Or I can drop off my video.
You could consider removing the
better.
video. Yeah. I think that would help.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I was just mentioning that as an entity registered in Uganda, you will do business with partners in other countries, and you may also need those comply with those data privacy laws in those respective countries. And the same case, if at all also you have branches across other countries, there's that bit of balancing the compliance within where the HQ is in Uganda vis-a-vis the other laws where your branches are. And while on that also there's a bit of a
Steve, I think we lost you again. Okay, I think we've lost Steve. Let's give him a few minutes. I'm sure he'll get back right into the meeting. Okay, he has joined.
Hello.
Steve, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I think I lost you at some point.
We lost you for a second.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was addressing the third-party risks, where we are saying that we need also our third parties to adhere to the same. I think this net. Sorry, just give me a minute. I can see my internet is acting up. 1 minute. Okay, I believe you can hear me.
We can hear you, but now we are unable to see the presentation.
Okay, 1 minute. Let me just share the screen again.
Could you maybe share the PowerPoint so that I do the sharing from this end, if that's okay with you? But also maybe you could just go ahead. Members, the presentation is going to be shared at the end of this webinar.
This is the internet. Anita, let me know whether you can see my screen and whether you can also hear me.
Yes, you can go ahead.
My apologies. Internet sometimes misbehaves even to the best of us.
Okay.
So I was at the third-party risks. I was saying that yes, we also need to ensure that our third parties also do comply to the Data Privacy Act. And more so, as ourselves as a data controller, we also need our data processors to also adhere to the same standards that have been set. The other challenge we also face is in terms of preparing for the incidents and more so the data breaches. In cybersecurity, we talk of 3 inevitables: death, taxes, and cyber incidents. So at some point they will occur. And when they occur, we need, of course, to manage and minimize the damages. But as well as also, there are consequences for us as a data controller, data processor. When these incidents do occur, there are some legal fines that we also have to deal with. And generally, there's also the bit of us being able to monitor our compliance and check evaluate our maturity process and of course, be able to conduct data privacy audits as stipulated by the law. So this is where compliance tools come in, and data privacy compliance tools are more of like lighthouses that not only just eliminate the path for us, just like a typical lighthouse does illuminate for vessels that are about to dock at a harbor, but beyond that, they should be able to provide us with metrics that, as I've mentioned, can be able to gauge us in terms of our maturity process, as well as also be able to pinpoint areas where there are risks. And risk here, I'm talking of data privacy risks that could either jeopardize us respecting the rights of the data subject, or that could lead, of course, to legal consequences that, as we mentioned earlier. So what should be some of the criteria that as data process officers, DPOs, should consider when looking for compliance tools? And I'll be just mentioning a few, but the list can be exhaustive beyond what I have on my screen. So of course, you need to have a very user-friendly interface, an intuitive design for ease of adoption. Remember, again, as a DPO, and I've seen this from our own experiences, you might be the DPO very well charged with ensuring that the data controller, data processor is compliant with the Data Privacy Act. But however, you realize within the organization, you need to bring in other champions from other departments to support you through the compliance process. So of course, you're bringing in other champions who might not have data privacy as their core business. So you need to have a system that is easy to use, easy to understand, even for them to be able to contribute towards the maturity of data privacy for the entity. And of course, the tool brings in the bit of centralization, meaning that you have a single hub to store and manage your compliance-related data. You can imagine trying to do a data inventory manually, probably on a piece of paper or even an Excel sheet. You have to get various data from various sources, which becomes very complex. Even reporting to management or even to the PDPO in terms of your compliance requirements. And of course, we are saying compliance tools are like lighthouses. So again, they give you that visibility and to be able to know where you are in terms of compliance, what trends are you able to pick from your compliance journey, because the data privacy compliance is actually a journey, not a destination per se. And in addition to that, tools are also able to bring in other value adds in terms of alerts and notifications, which keep the stakeholders informed where there are deadlines, if at all there are any violations that seem to be, that can be noted, so that you are able to work on those potential violations before they actually become a risk. And of course, we said third parties are part of us doing business. So we also be able to monitor the third party compliance, as well as also pick the same risks that we may be able to pick internally. And of course, when you use these tools, you're also able to get more insights in terms of from the reporting capabilities that enable an organization to make a data-driven decision in terms of not only just data privacy compliance, but in addition to how you do business and how do you gain value from the data that you have from your clients or your data subjects. And of course, you also want to work with a cost-effective tool because again, at the end of the day, you might have a limited budget. So you may not have that capability to invest that much in terms of the tools, but at the end of the day, also you want a tool that is able to create efficiency. So what are some of the functionalities that you should consider based on the value that is driven by these data privacy compliance tools? So I'll start off from the left. You may want to have a tool that is able to enable you to do a self-assessment, a data privacy self-assessment, which basically enables you to understand where are we at this point. Have we registered with the PDPO? Have we also documented our data privacy policy, for example? Do we have consent, giving an example of a bank? Do our customer account opening forms have the consent note, which is, of course, as defined by the Act, simple, clear, as expected by the Act? So that also enables an organization that is starting a compliance journey to have a gauge of where they are today as we now start mapping out the next actions in terms of the compliance. And the other critical thing for data compliance tool is the data inventory and mapping, or as others call it, record of processing activities, the ROPA. And this, to me, I always say this is the core of any compliance tool. Because if you're able to record in terms of your data, what data are you collecting, who has access to it, where is this data, what data sets are you also collecting, it gives you an overview in terms of the data that the organization does have. And this inventory or this mapping will enable you also appreciate the risks. And from my own experiences, I've seen organizations being able to do a data inventory, and they also unearth other insights, not necessarily related to data privacy compliance, but other insights that can be able to enable them make informed decision from a business point of view. Then, of course, again, guided by the Act, we may need to do a data privacy impact assessment, DPIA, of course, on business processes that have high risks. And of course, you'll have been able to identify that from the data inventory. So the data, the DPIA is generated from the data inventory, where you're able to pick out those business processes where that are at a high risk of data subjects' rights being either abused or not being able to meet the compliance requirements. Well, at the impact assessment, which is now being able to identify the risks from each of the business processes that we've identified. And at that point, we're also able to map out who would be the risk owners, so that when we get to the bit of risk treatment, we are able to assign this risk to these respective risk owners. And you remember I mentioned the bit of alerts and notification. This is why it really makes a lot of sense, because when you are doing the risk assessment, you'll be able to assign it to a risk owner and probably give a timeline of when this risk should be closed. So the risk owner will be getting alerts and notifications when these deadlines are either fast approaching or based on how the system has been set up. And of course, now when we go to the risk treatment, is now, of course, we are putting in what controls have we put in to address those risks. And if we've not yet put in any controls, we can indicate what future controls we intend to indicate. Of course, give timelines, assign them also to the risk owners or champions who will follow up with risks. Then they're, of course, held accountable that we said by the end of 31st December 2023, this risk should have been closed. So the risk owner can now run with that specific action to be able to close on that, which of course supports the organization's compliance. And after that, of course, you also need to manage the rights of the data subjects. The data subjects have been assigned specific rights with the Data Protection Act, and you need to be able to demonstrate that you can be able to offer an opportunity for your data subjects to exercise those rights. So having a portal where the data subjects can either request access to their data, for example, or if they want to prevent processing of their personal data, they should have a platform where you are able to pick that, and of course, internally, be in a position to follow the due process to address that right of the data subject. And of course, there's also the bit of policy management, privacy policy for that specific matter. And this could be addressing both consent notes. It could also be privacy, internal data privacy policies for your staff. So being able to draft the policies, be able to share it out to your employees, and get confirmation of which staff has have read, accepted, and signed off the policies. Of course, as a DPO, it gives you an overview in terms of new staff who are joining or new departments that are being created that have specific policies. So again, you're able to track very well in terms of how the privacy management is being addressed. And of course, we said breaches, data breaches, we can't avoid them. They would happen, but we need to minimize the damage. So it's important, of course, to also to have an element where we're able to depict these breaches that have occurred, whether they have met the law to be reported or not. It's important for us to record this because they also acts like a root cause analysis to prevent future reoccurrence of similar incidents. And of course, there is the bit of being able to document our technical organization measures that we've put in place to ensure that we protect the data that, the personal data that we have, as well as also continuously respect the rights of the data subjects. And of course, there could also be elements of having a capability to provide awareness training to our stakeholders. Our stakeholders could be our internal employees, could be our partners, could be our data subjects, our clients. And of course, at the end of the day, we also want to have a capability to be able to monitor and report in terms of our compliance, of course, internally to our senior management or the board, as well as, of course, also to the PDPO, if they were to knock doors and want to know organization-wide, we want to know your current compliance status. You are easily able to pull out this data and share it with the PDPO or whoever would be keen or interested to get to know the organization's compliance status. So with that, I would want to just address in terms of what's the return of investment in such tools. Of course, we've discussed some of these things, so I won't dwell into much into them. Of course, by now it's very clear there's a bit of efficiency. It's able to streamline your compliance process, saves you time, saves you resources, and of course, increases teams' productivity in terms of if you're able to bring in your data privacy champions together, and they're able to work with a tool that supports the entire compliance. And of course, as I also mentioned, when you're doing a data inventory, it gives an opportunity for improved data management. You're able to get more insights in terms of how you're using your data, and also, of course, being able to make data-driven decisions. Of course, when you're using the tool is actually an enhancement to your compliance. So that means that you're able to strengthen your customers or your data subjects trust, and being very transparent to them in terms of how you're handling their data. And of course, enabling the customer or the data subjects to exercise the rights that they have been granted by the Act. Of course, at the end of the day, we also want to do some cost savings. You don't want, of course, to be paying fines and legal penalties due to non-compliance. So the tool, as I say, do support us in terms of enhancing our compliance, and of course, enabling us also to attract customers. I say today, the data subject of today is informed. People are aware about their privacy rights, so they'll keep on challenging even both data processors and controllers on whether they are respecting those rights. And as I started, we are not looking at just data compliance, meeting just compliance. We need to look at it beyond that in terms of business continuity, as these data breaches, of course, have an impact on the organization. And of course, at the end of the day, we also want to build loyalty with our customers as we demonstrate commitment to data privacy to them as well as our stakeholders. So with that said and done, I'll just walk you through a tool called Data Privacy Manager that just touches base in terms of the things that I've just mentioned. So allow me to share my screen again. Okay. Anita, you'll guide me whether you can see my screen.
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so just a minute. Okay, so as I was mentioning in terms of how the compliance tool, insights that we should be able to get from our compliance tool, what you can see on your screen would be a basic dashboard, which, as I mentioned, gives that overview and insight in terms of how we are doing as a business in terms of compliance. So a lot of the things you are seeing on the screen will make more sense once we look at the other modules, but I'll come back to this once we're on that. So I would wish to start off with the self-assessment. As I had mentioned, the self-assessment enables you to appreciate where we are in terms of as an organization. MACU, this is the tool is aligned to the Data Privacy Act in Kenya. So you'll see a lot of mention of Data Privacy Act. But however, the principle is still the same. So we want to understand as an organization, have you registered? Do you know whether you're a controller or data processor? Then, of course, we look into issues to do with the lawful consent. If you look at the principles of data privacy, we are trying to understand where we are as an organization from that specific point. And of course, at every stage, as a data processor, data protection officer, you have more insight in terms of what the regulations, guidelines provide, so that you're also able to make an informed response in terms of, have we yet implemented? Are we maybe partially implemented, or maybe it's not something that has already been implemented? I'll jump on to something like basic as for data subjects. We also want to understand, do we have a platform where maybe we've provided data subjects to correct their personal data as reasonably as possible, of course, guided by the law, same principle, so that after we review all the principles of data subjects, we'll have the action plan, which I was mentioning earlier, gives us a good starting point in terms of our compliance journey. So, of course, things that are open, we need to start working on them, or working on them so that, of course, we ensure we meet that requirement. So they are nothing much, but the key of the solution, of course, becomes the area of data processing, or rather, data processing activity inventory, or the ROPA, as some others would call it. So here we want to understand the business activity, which is basically the process, the business process. We'll of course appreciate who are the owners. We also want to appreciate what kind of data are we collecting. Is it just confidential? Is it sensitive? Again, guided by what the Data Privacy Act stipulates. Again, we also want to know the approximate amount of data subjects. Remember, when we are doing the DPIA, we may want to use a criteria that we'll use to define what high risk is. And for example, we could decide that we'll do DPIA for, or rather we'll identify high risk business processes based on one, the amount of data subjects, approximate amount of data subjects that we've collected vis-a-vis the risk classification. So I would say maybe anything that is confidential and sensitive and meets a certain threshold, for argument purposes, let me say maybe 10,000 or 100,000, which could be probably all the data subjects that we have, will be used to make the decision in terms of which DPIA are we going to perform. Again, this can be individual, organization based. So not what I'm saying is cast in stone. Of course, we want to appreciate why are we processing this data. Of course, we want to get to know, was consent obtained? Is this data stored? Where is it stored? What's the retention period? You'll also appreciate that the other sectoral laws that may also have defined other retention period. So we also want to appreciate that for that period. Then, of course, appreciate the data types that we've collected. Is it date of birth? Is it national ID? Is it our names? You name it. Then what kind of data is it? Who else within the organization? So maybe, for example, this was data maybe by marketing, for example. But as much as marketing data, giving an example of a bank, this information probably will be accessed by credit team, for example, customer service, or whichever other departments that have will access this data, and they are probably not the primary custodian of this data. And of course, we want to appreciate if this data is transferred to third parties. The third parties could be our service providers, it could be cloud providers, or even third parties that we are working with to enable us deliver service to our end consumers. And of course, we also have a capability to provide some evidence or artifacts. Again, using my bank example, I could decide I'll attach here the account opening form that basically stipulates how this process would be. So we do that for all business processes where personal data is being collected, processed, and stored. Then from that, we'll also have an element of data transfer. Data transfer is now where we are looking at the third parties. So where we want to appreciate, we have several third parties or vendors, for lack of a better word. And we also understand what vendor, what, the buyer of that vendor, the purpose we are transferring data to them. So a good example could be a telco. We are providing these services to them because our end consumers, who are our clients, would want to access mobile money through the various channels provided. And again, how is due diligence conducted? Are they within the country or outside? What's the jurisdiction? And what's the data processing? Do we have a data processing agreement with them? Again, as per stipulated by the Act. So once we're able to have a proper data inventory, it now makes sense for us to do our DPIA. And as I had mentioned, our criteria can be what the example that I gave. Maybe we'll only do a DPIA for any business process where we are collecting confidential and sensitive data, and the data amount is maybe 100,000, for example. So once we do that, assuming in our data inventory we had data that meets that criteria, we would start working on the DPIA for that. I'll just take an example. So from a DPIA, we would want also first to look at the legal risks before even we go to the technology risks, because you can't discuss about the technology risks if we've not met the requirements or rather address the legal risks. So something as basic as consent. And you remember when we were doing the self-assessment, the principles of data privacy were highlighted. Remember the action plans of do we have consent, or rather have we collected consent from our data subjects before we start collecting, processing, and storing this data. So we look again at all those principles of data privacy from a legal point of view. So here it's either it's implemented, not implemented. You also have an option of providing further comments. So again, it could be as something as it's something that we are working on, or it's something that we've not yet implemented because of 1, 2, 3 items. But where the gist comes in is now when you're looking at the other risks. And here we're looking at who are there. First, we start off with who are the actors. The actors here is anyone who interacts with the data, the personal data. It could be an actor. An actor could be a user group. A user group could be maybe a department. It could be a third party that we are working. It could be an interface. Today we are looking at technology. So it could be something like an API that integrates with our core banking system, or it could be even a process or a sub-process within our organization. So first we document who the actors are. Then based on this actor, we're able to do a risk assessment for each of these actors. So a good, take an example, I'll say we have an actor called customer care. Customer care probably are our agents who are interacting with our data subjects. So these customers may not be the primary custodians of this data, but now we also want to appreciate what risks do exist in terms of data privacy and data protection that this customer or customer care department or user group would pose to us. So of course, we identify what's the risk, give a description of it. We want to understand what's the likelihood of this risk, what would be the impact if this risk was exploited. And again, what type of risk? Does it affect confidentiality, integrity, availability, and accountability? So I'll just look at an example that we already have. Data leakage, yes. So an example would be a sensitive data shared with unauthorized parties. Maybe here we are saying this is something medium. the impact would be high definitely, and maybe it impacts confidentiality. So we'll do that for all the actors that we've identified. Then from there, remember we said all these risks will be assigned to specific risk owners who will be responsible to closure of these risks. So when we come to the risk assessment, we'll pick all the risks that we've identified, indicate whether there are already existing security controls in place, and if none exist, we are able to indicate that this is something that we intend to implement, and probably indicate when this will be implemented. So giving an example, assume we've added a new control called, we want to implement a data leakage prevention solution. So of course, this will assist us to ensure that data is not shared outside our corporate environment. This would be, of course, be a technical control. And when we implement this DLP solution, what do you think will be the mitigation level? So if once the DLP solution is in place, of course, data cannot be shared out with outside the organization, because the system will deter that from happening. So I could indicate the mitigation level would be probably 90, because of course you can't eliminate the risk completely. And probably maybe this is something we've already implemented. So if implemented, we close on that task. If not, this is where I was saying we can come back and say this is a task that we intend to close end of October, and we are just releasing an update that will now be able to indicate who's the risk owner we've assigned this task, so that these risk owners will now be getting notifications as we progress that they need to action onto these controls that we've identified. And just to add on also another point on that would be that as much as you're the DPO who might have full access to the platform, remember you also need to engage with the other champions that I mentioned. So those champions who might also be some of the risk owners will be getting alerts and notifications in terms of what is expected of them on the tool. And of course, they can also get back to the tool, be able to give comments in terms of the actions they have taken, or even if that risk is not yet closed and maybe they would request for an extension, give a justification of why they would want that justification. So as the DPO on the other side, you'll be able to have an overview in terms of the risks that you've been able to identify, how many security controls have already been closed, what's open, and more importantly, what's the risk monitor. Currently, our mitigation risk could be probably at 20%. But if we were to address the other mitigating security controls that we've proposed, it probably shoots up to 27, 50%, or 80%, or wherever. And as I was saying, at this point also, you're also able to have an overview in terms of what's already open, what's pending. And as I was saying, the owners, you'd be able to know that this risk is assigned to Steve Mambo, who should close it by 10th of September 2023, or something of the sort. In addition to that, we spoke about the data subjects' rights. And here I was saying earlier on that we need to allow our data subjects to exercise their rights. So the platform here also gives them that opportunity where a data subject is able to probably go to our website, click on a link and request for their rights to be availed. So a good example would be, and just to mention, this site can actually, this link rather can be independent of the entire tool. So as I was saying, we can have this company's website where the data subject only is able to view what you can see on my screen, which is just the data protection portal. Anita, you can confirm whether you still see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Good. Okay. So here, as I was saying, you have all options to enable the data subjects exercise their right, from data correction, consent withdrawal, general requests. Of course, they provide their information and of course, be able to send back to us. And again, the bit of consent also is there while on the site. So allow me just to go back to, so that we view what we would see on the other end now as the DPO. So as the DPO, you have a view of all the requests that have been made by your data subjects, which ones have been addressed, which ones have been closed, which ones are still pending, and which ones maybe cannot be serviced due to some conditions or some unmet threshold based, of course, on the organization's request. And again, also, once we service that request, we also want to anonymize that data based, again, on guidance by the law. So once the request has been serviced, we just need to know that there was a request placed by one of our data subjects. They wanted access to the information or consent withdrawal. And we've already anonymized their name, the email, or the phone number, or information they provided us at the point of requesting this data. And also, while this request has been sent to the DPO also has some guidelines in terms of how do you service these requests. Of course, it has come from the website. We want to verify the identity of this individual. So maybe a link is sent to the email that they have provided for them to confirm that the actual owner or the ones who made this request, as well as other guidelines in terms of how do you service this request as guided by the law. Another area I think we mentioned was on the data breaches. And as I mentioned, data breach response plan is more of a root cause analysis. We want to appreciate the data breach that has occurred, whether it meets the requirement to be reported to the data subject and the PDPO. We need to document this so that it becomes a learning point for us to continue enhancing our data protection and privacy controls. So again, here, would of course want to appreciate what was the cause of the breach, which systems were affected, as well as document as much information around the affected data subject and data types. And of course, we need to do our own risk assessment. Was there sensitive data affected? If maybe encrypted data was compromised or anonymized, the risk would be probably a bit lower, unlike if it was plain text data. And of course, we also address issues to do with reporting. Again, as I've mentioned, guided by the Act, whether the data breach met requirement to be reported to the data subject or as well as the PDPO. And of course, at the end of the day, as I said, this is a root cause analysis. We need to learn from these experiences so that we enhance our security controls to prevent similar incidents from occurring. In addition to that, I also spoke a bit of awareness. And awareness here, as I said, we are targeting several stakeholders. It could be maybe our staff. So we would probably have all employees or rather emails of all our employees, send out to them some awareness material. And as they complete this learning material, we are able to get an overview of who has completed the awareness content, which department is pending, and it can be granular to the point of we can have specific awareness training material for the specific departments and probably have generic awareness material for the rest of the departments. And of course, as I said, as the DPO, you have a visibility of how the campaign is performing in terms of the users who are taking up the training. And of course, we spoke about the technical and organization measures. At this point, of course, you're able to address and indicate what has been implemented from those specific terms. So classic example could be maybe physical access. Maybe have we zoned out our office areas where maybe personal data is being processed. So again, here is just a quick check, yes, no, yes, no. So this gives us an overview in terms of our maturity, our terms maturity at the end of the day once we are done with that. As I finalize, I would also want to mention on the policy framework. So as I mentioned, on the policy framework could be used from two perspectives. We could use it, of course, internally for our employees in terms of our data privacy policy. So of course, the policy, we can have the data privacy policy first actually drafted, approved on the platform, as well as also shared out to our staff members for them to read through and confirm that they consent to our data privacy policy. The same thing could also be used also to our third parties for the data privacy agreements. Could send them again a link. Everything again is very digitized. For them also to adhere, confirm and that they will adhere to our data privacy processing agreement, among others. Then of course, at the end of the day, as I mentioned, again, you're able to know how many employees have already received and accepted our data privacy policy. Or also it could also be how many of our third parties have also accepted our data privacy processing agreement. And in addition to that, of course, because the platform is there, you could also use it for other internal policies, HR policies, IT policies, you name it. And as I go back to data privacy management, now the dashboard will make more sense after what we've walked through, that once you land on the portal, you're able to know how many actions or rather to-do lists, how many are open, what's probably in progress, what's completed. We spoke about the data maturity, protection maturity from the self-assessment. So of course, this spider web keeps on growing as you continue to work through your data compliance journey. Of course, from the inventory, it gives us an overview in terms of where are we collecting maybe confidential and sensitive data, where are we just collecting sensitive data, and we can even go granular to even critical departments. So we can tell that maybe in finance, marketing, we are collecting a lot of confidential and sensitive. So this is an area that we may want to put more emphasis given the category of data, personal data that we are collecting. And of course, the TOM will keep on growing as we enhance and improve on our data privacy and protection. With that said and done, I know I'm 5 minutes to time, so I also need to allow an opportunity for questions, feedback, clarification, or anything that may generate from this conversation. Thank you, and I send it back to you, Anita.
Okay, thank you so much, Steve, for that very informative presentation. And of course, most importantly, for the self-assessment tool. A question that maybe everyone could be asking themselves that I'm also thinking about is, how do we access this tool? Is it free? Is there something we need to do to access it? Yes.
Very well, thank you for asking that. So of course, the tool may not come out free. Sorry, I forgot to mention that it's a cloud-based solution. So maybe let's start off from there. So of course, in terms of access, the tool can be accessed by anyone who's of interest. So of course, as an organization, we provide it to support customers with the compliance. So with that, those organizations also compensate us for that work. So there are two packages in terms of offering for the customer, for small and medium enterprises, as well as for corporates. So the tool is available in the two packages, but I can provide further information once probably get to understand which kind of client would be interested to be onboarded on the tool.
Okay, thank you very much. With that said, maybe you could share your contacts in the chat so that whoever needs this tool can reach out to you directly. Thank you so much for that. Members, let's embrace these tools and controls so that we are able to assess where we are in terms of compliance. And of course, in turn, make this compliance journey easier for all of us. I am going to take questions in the interest of time. I see we have only 3 minutes to go, so I will take only about 3 questions. If you feel at the end of the day that your questions have not been answered, please keep them coming on our social media platforms. You can as well send them to us on email, and we'll relay them to the rightful people to respond to them. So I am going to take some questions in the Q&A panel. Someone asked, is the Yale Bridges solution adaptable to other countries' data privacy acts? And also, is it continuously updated with those countries' acts?
That's a good question, if I'm allowed to take it. So we can actually customize it to fit into any other data privacy acts. We've actually done some work with the Ghana data privacy law. So we could also do the same for the Data Privacy Act in Uganda.
Okay, thank you very much. There is another question here. Someone asks, with the emerging technologies like AI and this tool being a cloud-based solution, what are the risks it might face in the modern world?
Good question again. So of course, as I introduced myself, we said, or rather I said that Yale Bridges is a cybersecurity company. So of course, from risks, more so cyber risk, of course, we've addressed that from a cybersecurity point of view. Of course, we also need to be able to preach what we drink. So the tool, of course, has also gone through several and continuously goes through vigorous testing, as well as also the environment where we've set it up is being monitored by our own team. But you also mentioned a good point. We are also looking towards how we can be able to integrate AI in terms of some of the processes that and features that we have on the tool. So those are works in progress. And of course, receiving such feedback is very critical for us to enhance and ensure the tool supports our data controllers and processors meet the requirements of the law.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Steve. And the last question I'm going to ask is, someone says, these systems usually break down and slow down. How do they handle this? How do you handle this?
Okay, good question. As I mentioned, I think the environment we have it currently is in a very stable environment. Just for your information, we launched the tool last year in August. We've not had any issues to do it, and the tool is currently in use in Kenya and Ghana. We've not had any instances, but again, as I said, security, we think of business continuity. So we've also put in measures to ensure that if our primary site was unavailable, our clients are not impacted as we have a disaster, a DR site to support us. But also of interest also, if we could, the tool can actually be hosted in country. In country, I mean, if today we have customers in Uganda who are keen on this, we are open to also hosting it internal within the country, just to meet those clients' needs. Sorry. All
right. Thank you so much, Steve. I can see there are more questions still coming in. Please do share them on our emails. Steve, I continue to remind you to share your contact in the chat where people can reach out to you in case they need that tool. For those that have been asking for the presentation, we are going to share it on the emails that you used to register for this webinar. The recording is already available on our YouTube channel. The handle is at PDPO Uganda. You can go there and check it out, but we'll also share it on your emails. I've posted a link in the chat. Kindly click on it and give us feedback on how this webinar was and how you think we can improve the future webinars. I am going to invite Becca. Becca is our Manager, Compliance and Investigations at the Personal Data Protection Office. I am going to ask him to give a vote of thanks to our presenters for today and also close this webinar. Over to you, Becca.
Thank you, Anita. I also thank all the participants that have made time to attend this webinar on a compliance solution tool, but also thank Yale Bridges for making time and being elaborate. As you're all aware, compliance is very key. Most of you are registered, but registration is just the first step. There is a lot more that needs to be done after registration, of which tools of this kind enable you to do your work. I need to also add, this tool is not owned by the office. As the office, we give platforms to individuals, experts that we believe can support your compliance journey, and this is one of them. So you can reach out to them, engage them, and see if you can have them on board. But we also encourage you to keep seeking out either internally or even with other players in the market to support your compliance journey. Enforcement has already started, so we will be expecting that in your further annual compliance reports, such measures should have been properly catered for, and you can actually have evidence to support that. That, we close this webinar, and you can enjoy the remaining day of the working week. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. A good day, everyone.
Thank you, Nita. Thank you, Becca. Thank you, entire PDPO office. I've shared my contacts as had been requested. And I also want to thank you all the participants for being part of this, and wishing you a good afternoon or morning based on where you are. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Bye.